Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, we'll be joined by Representative Marion Proctor to talk about a big hearing that happened on Certificate of Need. What is it? How does that affect healthcare in Kentucky? And what happened at the hearing? We'll be discussing all that with Representative Proctor today. You know, DMVs have always been pretty awful. Somehow the state has made it even worse. We'll go over exactly all the problems everybody's having with the now driver's licensing program here in Kentucky. They're vast. Somehow they've just when you think government can't get worse, they figure out a way. And then also, I will first be sharing with you some street preaching, Kentuckiana Pride. There's a street preacher that showed up just to talk about love, acceptance, talk about God, Jesus, repentance, all good things. Well, the people of Pride couldn't handle that. We'll play you some of those videos. From that instance, you'll see some people acting pretty crazy. I have to warn you. So we'll have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. If this is your first time tuning in, thank you for joining us. If you're watching this on video format on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or on WBNA 21 in Louisville, thank you for joining us. As always, though, to remind you, you can catch this show in an audio-only format Monday through Friday on all podcasting platforms, as well as on WZXI in the Central Kentucky areas at 9 a.m. They're on the radio there, WZXI at 9 a.m. So if you like what you're hearing, you're like, wow, this is a fantastic show. I'm learning so much about Kentucky. Well, you can feel free to catch the show every single day, but just in an audio-only form. And finally, if you want to reach out to the show with your questions, ideas, or comments, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Without further ado, let's get into it. And so a YouTuber who goes around posting street preaching, just preaching the gospel to these loving people. Remember that when these pride parades and these LGBTQ activists, they claim they're all about love. Love is love. Love everybody, accept everybody. Christians, true Christians that say, hey, look, homosexuality, transgenderism, that's a sin. Now, granted, it's a sin. That doesn't mean we hate you for it. Doesn't mean you can't come into church and find redemption. All it means is it's a sin. And if you want to be a Christian, right, be a Christian, but you have to recognize that unless you turn away from sin like that, God will not bless you. That's a basic Christian tenet, that you should not try to sin. Now, we have a whole lot of churches out here trying to rewrite the Bible, rewrite what is a sin and what isn't for, well, just so they can seem cool to their neighbors, I guess. I don't know. But that doesn't change it that there are warriors out there who want to step up and say, no. What you're doing here is a sin, but you can find love and redemption. You can find happiness. Because that's the other thing. See, all these rules that you find in the Christian faith, so often if people follow them, what they find is they have a better life just in general. Because the rules are for a better life. You know, call the 10 Commandments, 10 rules for a better life. Maybe that was it. It was short, much shorter, 10 Commandments than the book. But anyway, than the book, 10 Rules for Life. Already got them. Moses gave it to us. Anyways, let's take a look though at some of the street preaching from a, Christian man, young man that was just trying to share the gospel with the people at the Kentuckiana Pride Festival. Let's take a look at that.
He loves you. He cares for you. But God is not okay with not loving people.
You haven't got a haircut.
God gives two commands.
Get a haircut.
He loves you. He said to love him with all of his heart, soul, all of his strength.
Look at that haircut. Look at that haircut.
His plan.
Look at that haircut. Cut it, bitch. Jesus wants you to cut your fucking hair.
My hair hair that important?
No, it is.
Why
Because
is
it's
it that
fucking
important?
ugly as fuck.
Well, that's your opinion.
Yeah, no, that is the truth. That's the truth.
I got better things to talk about than my hair.
I can just imagine part of
God loves you so much.
Let me do my hair. Where I go with the
Jesus
fat. Well,
to
your
the
fucking
world.
faggot ass haircut is ugly.
He was tempted in every way.
Ugly, bitch.
But yet, Jesus
Fucking ugly. Got it. You need to
Jesus
stop that
without
shit.
sin was perfect. And Jesus took the sins of the world. It says that he became cursed for us. Jesus literally, he was hung on a tree and he was brutally murdered. He was kidnapped in the middle of the night and he loves you. That's why he took the nails to his hands and he took the whip upon his back. He took the crown of thorns upon.
That is just a bunch of animals. I know some of you couldn't see it. This man is just preaching on the side of the sidewalk at a pride festival, attempting to just say Jesus loves you, he accepts you, he doesn't want you to be this way, but he does love you, accept you, just sharing the honest gospel with people. And the group of people that say they're all about love and tolerance has decided, well, they can't tolerate that at all. What's funny is during that, you've got a few people screaming just absolutely in his face, real close. And you have some police officers literally just standing there, off to the side. And while everybody has a right to express themselves and they're free to, I guess, yell and go over the top, I don't think, one of the women especially was literally like almost spitting in the guy's face. She was so close to him. She was right up next to his face as far as that goes. You know, real law and order, you know, police officers that say, look, let's, you know, yell all you want to, express your opinion, but you can't be spitting on him while you're doing it. Okay? You can't be so close that you're literally spitting in the man's mouth. Pull him back. Now, of course, as he's sitting there talking, none of them have any opinions about what he's actually saying. As you can hear, the main agitator there, the main, I think that's a woman that was mainly upset, was upset about his haircut more than anything else. A lot of expletives surrounding his cruddy haircut. And, you know, if I'm to be honest, his haircut looks fine. It tells you these people are not very imaginative. The best thing they could find out about the guy to try to make fun of him about was his haircut, I guess. Which big words from people literally dressed like the most unattractive people possible. Literally the most unattractive people you can imagine yelling at a guy about his hair. It's just ridiculous. But what's even more telling in that video, and some of you may have missed it that were even watching it, and for those of you listening to the show, there was a small child waving around trans flags and pride flags right next to that. These family-friendly people, these family-friendly, fantastic events. You literally have people cussing in their faces, and you have a child running up to the guy just simply trying to preach the gospel, waving around and jumping and getting involved. And then at the end, in front of the child, the adults start twerking around him. These are family-friendly events, we're told. This is something you should bring your kid to. Yeah, bring your kid to go ahead and watch a bunch of intolerant, bigoted people attack somebody for their faith that was not bothering anybody, just speaking. Watch them yell expletives in his face about his haircut and then twerk around him. Yeah, let's take our kid to that. That sounds really, really great. Well, the interim joint committees are meeting. Now, for those of you unaware, outside of session, during session, they have standing committees that meet during session and take action on bills. They can move things forward, things like legislation to be considered for the floor, resolutions, those kinds of things. They can kind of push them forward. But in the off session, what happens is there's joint interim committee. So the members of the House Standing Committee of, for an example, Licensing and Occupation, and the members of the Senate Standing Committee of Licensing and Occupation, they come together and they go ahead and they meet in a interim joint committee that doesn't do anything per se official as far as proposing bills and those kinds of things, but they do have hearings on pieces of legislation. And one of those things they had a hearing on was Certificate of Need in Kentucky. What happened with that hearing? We'll have that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I'm joined by Representative Proctor from Northern Kentucky. She had a recently interesting moment inside an interim joint committee on licensing and occupation that dealt with certificate of need. Representative Proctor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you had this recent hearing on CON, or certificate of need as it's called. Can you explain real quick what certificate of need is for anybody who's unaware, and what CON laws are and how they operate here in Kentucky?
Sure. Certificate of need is basically a government permission slip that a new healthcare provider that would love to come into the state of Kentucky to open business, they must obtain from the Cabinet of Health to be able to open up. So it's a very long, complex process. Its substantial review is for anything like a hospital or ambulatory surgical center or physical medicine rehabilitation, chemical dependency, mental health treatment, all those things. They have to go through this lengthy 9-step process that can take years and thousands of dollars to be able to obtain it. So that's what it is. It limits healthcare services in the Commonwealth.
So how did certificate of need even come about? I mean, as I understand, we've had it for decades. What was the original thought process behind certificate of need when it came in? How long has it existed in Kentucky? Could you fill us in on that?
I can. Certificate of need began in the late 60s up in New York, and it was initially instituted to really control the amount of healthcare services to make sure that it wasn't duplication of services that weren't necessary or needed. The thought process was if you limit them, you won't have too many hospitals, too many MRI machines, things like that. But back in the 60s, that was a very different payment system than it is now. So the government realized after 10, 15 years of implementation in 1986, that the federal government actually repealed certificate of need, said you don't need it anymore, urged the states to get rid of certificate of need. But many states like Kentucky have not. Some immediately did. There were some states, 4 or 5, that immediately, when they were able to get rid of certificate of need, did not. Kentucky, fortunately, I believe we've had it since 1972. And we have hung on to, there's 32 different services and technologies that are limited by certificate of need that may not enter the state without the government mandated permission slip.
And when they're getting that permission slip, is the government just having you sit through hearings? Is it highly politically charged? What is the, I guess you would say, okay, it sounds to some people, it may sound okay as you hear it. Those people obviously believe in government controlling and regulating a lot more. They may say, look, healthcare needs a lot of regulation. What specifically goes on in the certificate of need process that creates not just an arduous burden, but that's causing things like Kentucky having high healthcare costs and other issues that certain experts, and as you have argued many a times even on this show, is causing an increase in healthcare costs here in Kentucky? What about that process is causing that increase?
Well, it's a really expensive process, and it's akin to a full jury trial. It is incumbent on the new healthcare provider that wants to come in to show the need. So they have the burden of proof, and there's a formula by the state health program that they must meet, and that's what determines whether you have need or not. But it's a little bit more complicated than that, because not only is a new provider required to obtain attorneys, and these fees just to apply are super expensive. You have the dominant provider that is able to sue procedurally, and they often win. There's 2 steps at steps 3 and 9 that they are able to sue along the way that drags out the certificate of need process, makes it much more expensive for a new provider wanting to come in. And so that is a deterrent to healthcare coming in. So it's basic economics 101. You limit the supply of things and it makes it more expensive. So I know they say, well, certainly here in Northern Kentucky where I am, we have a really rapidly growing area. Boone County is the 4th largest population-wise now in the Commonwealth, and yet we only have 1 healthcare provider. We've been told, well, you have choices. Well, my choices outside of Northern Kentucky are to go to Ohio. So, for example, it is double the cost to have a baby in Kentucky than it is Ohio. you limit services, you limit facilities, you're going to limit competition, and then you're able to charge higher prices for things. You've got to make it up.
And going to Ohio isn't really an option for a lot of people because their insurance, I mean, that's out of, what is that? That's out of coverage area. That's out of network. Thank you. Yes, that's out of network doctors because that's a whole nother state. And so, crossing the river, you're now out of network. And so while it costs twice as much here in Kentucky, if you have a Kentucky-based insurance, it can be pretty hard to actually get coverage across the river there. So that certainly, practically, limits the amount of competition there. But you mentioned that the competitors are able to kind of come in at different steps of certificate of need and sue. So the person who wants to come in has to show, hey, look, we have a need that needs to be filled, we believe. And then current providers get to sue and say, no. There's not a need. We're covering the need. They're lying. Is that accurate?
Correct. And what's even more insidious is that the dominant provider, say they've got, I'm just making these up numbers, say they have 10 MRI machines. They can pull some of those MRI machines out of circulation and say, so that the other, how many ever they have running, well, look, we're full of time. People are waiting to get appointments for MRIs while they have some sitting that they're not using just to show, well, look, there isn't the need. Look, we can't even keep up with the need now. And that can happen with equipment, that can happen with hospital beds, that can happen in a lot of areas that the dominant provider can you can play with those numbers a little bit to kind of show the cabinet, no, there's not a need.
Well, and it's pretty shocking to the would-be competition can come in and say, no, there's not a need. There's no other market where that's the case, where they take into account whether or not the would-be competitors wish to have competition on that side of things. And basic principles here would say that competition is how you lower costs. As because Kentucky has such a pervasive certificate of need process, how has that affected our overall healthcare costs when compared to just states around us? Has it been higher? Are we actually lower than a lot of places? How's that look? I mean, you mentioned it costs twice as much to have a baby in Kentucky when compared to Ohio. Is it pretty much that way across the board when you compare us state to state? We see higher than average healthcare costs?
Those numbers are a little bit difficult to obtain. Some of these I've gotten just from speaking to other people other hospitals up in Ohio, just getting round numbers. Hey, what does it cost for having a baby was one of them. So I don't really have all the data on that, but I do know that Kentucky has more medical debt, significantly more than other states around us. And one can surmise there's lots of reasons why that could be, but it could be because it's much more expensive. If you look what's happening, commercial healthcare has gotten so expensive that a lot of people can't even really use it, right? It's very difficult for some people to meet those deductibles, so people aren't going.
Right.
There's a lot.
I was in the hospital, not to spread around any of my medical information too much to listeners, but I was in the hospital recently, overnight, one day. Emergency room visit, and then admitted overnight one day, just kind of dealing with, I had a kidney stone and there was something I'm worried about, an infection or something. And so I was basically just being watched for a day until I passed the kidney stone. And, I have insurance, but I saw the bill before insurance and it was like $35,000 and I didn't even get surgery. I didn't get anything like that at all. All I literally got was some pain meds and an IV ran in me, a couple of lackluster meals. That's about all I got out of them. So it is pretty shocking to see some of these price tags. Now, you, as we've had you on the show before, so I'm speaking for you for a second. What got you involved here is that when you were first running for office, you were hitting a lot of doors, talking to a lot of people, and this issue of healthcare and being stuck with St. East there in northern Kentucky kept coming up a lot while you were talking with constituents, and it was a big concern of them. And that kind of woke you up to start to take a look at why is it that St. East has, such a monopoly over, what is it, around 400,000 people's healthcare?
Close to that. I mean, they own 17 counties in the Commonwealth.
17 counties. So has a monopoly on 17 counties in Kentucky, but there's been other issues too with certificate of need. Not to go off too much on tangent, but something that happens and affects people that maybe could be listening in other areas than Northern Kentucky, such as Louisville or Lexington. There was a big problem, I believe 2 years ago or so, where they tried to move the ambulatory commission over to being underneath the Kentucky hospitals, the same group that oversees them, because the hospitals were running into problems where individuals who are on managed care that needed, transported back to things like their nursing homes or as such, but they need transported in an ambulance. Well, because of certificate of need, they can't there's only so many ambulance providers in the area. And so your EMTs, a lot of time, your county people, they have that certificate of need for the ambulance service in that area. And they prioritize, obviously, people like in a car accident dying on the roadside over transporting people from the ER back to their managed care. And the hospitals were like, look, we can't clear out these beds fast enough because you're not just giving people rides back. Now, instead of repealing certificate of need on ambulance service and just saying, look, if hospitals want to buy an ambulance in order to run passengers back and forth, the hospital association said, we'd rather take over control over the ambulance service completely so you can prioritize taking, grandma who just needs a ride back to the nursing home over, somebody dying on the roadside from a car accident. And that was quite to do. And so I know that has ramifications as well. So in this fight, though, you've had some hearings, you've had some committee fights. We'll go over where that's sitting because something very interesting happened last week on that. After this short break, you are listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And you're back here with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We're joined by Representative Proctor. We're talking about certificate of need. In the last segment, she went over exactly what certificate of need is and kind of how that's affected Kentucky. But in her fight against certificate of need, last year, they created a certificate of need task force that you were a part of that heard arguments from, of course, Kentucky Medical Association, the hospital lobbyists, and from free market advocates and economists. You're a part of that committee hearing. Just real quick, tell us what happened last year and what did they come up with is what they should do. What should the task force do moving forward to go ahead and deal with certificate of need as an issue?
Well, after our 7 months of all that robust discussion, the conclusion was to have another task force, which was supposed to have been in this interim. But as we know, that didn't come to fruition. So here we are. Yeah,
actually interesting. I want to play, I played this on the show a little bit ago, but here's a hearing from House Bill 204 this last year. You had been called forward to talk about certificate of need bill. And at the end of that, we heard a whole lot of feedback from the people voting no, that they would not be passing forward a certificate of need reform. Real quick, I want the listeners to hear just a little 1 minute, 30-second montage.
It's premature to pass this legislation until further study recommended by the task force is being completed.
Do I think certificate of need needs to be repealed? Absolutely. I think there's some major problems with it, and I'll be the first one to stand there and help you with it, and I'll even volunteer for the task force. But in this situation, I just don't think that this is the time. We need to see what the task force comes up with. And
I think it's a little premature. The task force came back with a recommendation to study it some more.
Hope that we will continue working through the task force to find solutions and changes we can make to the certificate of need. I hope that we will continue these conversations. I hope the task force continues.
Where we can really have deep study, come back with the recommendations.
We have reservations about piecemealing this in legislation that hasn't really been fully vetted by the task force yet.
So that was a montage of everybody who voted no saying that they wanted to hear from a task force more on certificate of need. Now, Senator Donald Douglas did propose to a joint resolution to reform that task force. That went nowhere this last session. Instead, they seem to have rolled it into the hearing on licensing and occupation. Can you explain why they decided to go ahead and do that?
I would love to, but I had no communication with leadership why that didn't come to be. I heard with everybody else in LNO this last week, Senator Schickles reasoning on why that didn't happen. He said that he had spoken with leadership and they felt like they were trying to reduce the number of task force that held in the summer. We have these interim hearings all summer that we go down there, and leadership felt that was best where to have these meetings. But as of this date, Senator Schickel has been the only one that has asked for me to come in and testify about CON.
I'm going to play for our listeners something said by Senator Meredith in that hearing.
So we have to address the cost. But the problem is what's going to be presented today, I believe, will not address that issue. It's going to be suggested that by implementing free market principles in healthcare, we can reduce costs and increase access to care.
Now, Meredith is a Republican, right?
Correct.
Okay, he is a Republican. And so he just made an argument that free market principles, for some reason, Republicans are supposedly for free market principles. It's supposed to be something that Republicans champion everywhere they can. But listening to his argument, you sat through that committee. If you could, do the best you can to kind of steel man his argument. So if a constituent was to walk up to him and say, look, why do you hate free markets when it comes to healthcare? What do you think he would say?
I can't presume to know what Senator Meredith would say, but I have heard his argument many times. And what he is saying with healthcare, and this is what all the hospitals argue, and there is an element of truth to this. A lot of the patients, if you take Medicare, Medicaid, those are predetermined rates set by the government. But my argument has been consistently that they're conflating cost reimbursement, hospital reimbursement, with certificate of need. It just doesn't make sense in Economics 101 that if you limit competition by keeping, and I've heard Meredith say multiple times, we need a monopoly to make rural healthcare work. Well, that's just not true. We have certificate of need in Kentucky.
Could you explain a little bit there? So you talked about hospital reimbursement rates and why we need certificate of need and Medicare and Medicaid and his argument there. So what are they exactly arguing when it comes to the reimbursements and things? Are they arguing that they need a monopoly because government doesn't pay enough?
I think what they're arguing is, yes, government doesn't pay enough. But what I hear every time they say this, they say that commercial payers, they need that reimbursement rate from commercial payers.
They're saying, what they're admitting is that, look, we need a monopoly. So all those who aren't using the government free healthcare system or Medicare, Medicaid, what have you, all those who aren't using that, we need to go ahead and we need to make our profits then to operate off of our private payers who are paying either cash or with health insurance. And so not only do you pay more in taxes, just period, but what they're saying is that we have to lock that private payer in. And we got to juice the books. We got to really crank up how much they're paying. And we can't give them a choice to go anywhere else because we have to make up for Medicare, Medicaid. Would you say that's accurate? That's their argument, basically?
That has been the argument.
I mean, people are going into debt that don't have health insurance, that don't qualify for Medicare, Medicaid, that have these massively high hospital bills, and they're in all kinds of medical debt. And the reason why it can't go lower is because of literally you have another group of people who I guess you argue would be worse off than them that are relying on that golden goose to pay for their healthcare way.
That's my understanding for what they say. But my question to them has always been, when we have this competition, so you're telling me that if people have a choice as to where they want to go in hospital care, that they don't want to go to your facility? And nobody really has a great answer for that. It's just Economics 101. If rural hospital, and I do believe it is difficult to staff, and the challenges that Senator Meredith lay out, there's some validity to that. I will not deny that. But who then would want to rush into rural and spend the capital and the amount of money to set up competition? It's just not a valid argument. You're not going to go where there's not demand. You're not going to go buy out something that's failing. So that to me never makes sense, but it's an argument I hear over and over, and I can't really get good clarification to those questions that I ask.
So the argument is that we need to lock these people in to pay this, but you're saying that, okay, but if there's no profit to be made in these areas, then why would somebody want to come into the area in the first place?
Correct. So I don't think it's a valid fear. If there's, I understand rule, they don't want to let people in. Okay. But there's many places up here, and it's not just the hospitals. I had many developers call me this session wanting to know, hey, what's going to happen with the certificate of need? Because not only do we want to come put in some medical facilities, but we want to do a whole development of restaurants and hotels and other things that bring jobs, bring tax revenue, bring more into your state. And my state says no.
Well, we wish you the best of luck as you try to fight the good fight and deal with this. I'm sorry that this is a little bit of a struggle for you, but hopefully we can get something moving this next session. And, all those people who said, well, we'll wait for the task force. Maybe you can remind them that they didn't make the task force happen. And so maybe instead of sitting on their hands, they need to get off their butts. And if leadership doesn't want it reformed, well, the rest of the body that's there to represent the people should demand it be reformed. So let's hope that's what ends up happening. But, we'll see. Congratulations to in your primary win here recently. Those hospitals, they tried to take you out over your certificate of need stand. Didn't work out too well for them. So that's a kind of risk, though, that our representatives have to go through for doing the right thing, for standing up for the people, not bowing down to the corporations. They dump hundreds of thousands of dollars against people like yourself, and it's unfortunate to see, but I'm glad that you gave such a commanding victory. So thank you so much for joining us, Representative.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We'll be back in a few short minutes. And you're back here in this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So when I was running for state treasurer last year, and I traveled all around the state, attended many candidate forums, and of course this didn't come up for the treasurer forum, but on the governor side of things, there was quite a lot of questions about driver's licensing. You see, back in the day, back when I got my license, a very long time ago, clearly, very old man, back in the day, when I got my driver's license, I went to my county clerks where I do my registration now, and I went to driver's licensing and I took my road test there. And when I wanted to get a permit, I took a written test at the county clerk's office. When I wanted to simply get a car registered, inspected, to be registered, you take it to the county clerk's office, right? You do many of those things. Well, now that's not what happens. When it comes to driver's licensing, that's now handled by the state. And the state's done it in completely the worst ways they can imagine. The DMV, people joke about it, that the DMV has always been just an awful government invention. Some of the worst possible experiences you'll have with government will come at DMV. It's been a joke for a long time. Well, our state came in and said, hold my beer. Okay. We're going to see if we can make this even worse. And what they've managed to do is take the entire DMV experience and then make it even more awful when it comes to your driver's licensing, because they're going to make you now set appointments for it. And this was a common problem I heard as I was traveling around state treasurer race there, hearing those forums that I was talking about, was that people couldn't get in to get their driver's license or get their kids to have a test for their driver's license. That they were either waiting months on end or having to drive for hours and hours and hours in order to get their kids just simply a license to drive. And I said, wow, that is awful as I was hearing about this. But this problem now doesn't just exist in rural areas. This is happening now in major city centers, places like Lexington and Louisville. Trying to schedule a written permit test right now is nearly impossible. Nearly impossible. You can't do it unless you're trying to drive 2-3 hours away from Lexington or from Louisville. You can't get a time in. And so they've taken still the most awful people to deal with, because of course there's no customer service needs involved at all, because where are you going to go? Go somewhere else. And then they make you schedule an appointment months out, or maybe not at all, because they don't even have an availability. So you got to schedule it hours away just in order to have the interactions with these people that just seem like they really, really hate you. They've made it worse. And all of this under claims of, well, we needed to do this because of, we had to change up the real ID system. The federal government passed its law requiring real IDs. In order to implement it, the state had to go ahead and take over the process of driver's licensing and just make it so much worse. Now, there's a proper way to do this. And this is a big problem I see with the state. And by a proper way to do this, I mean there was a better way. There's no proper way to do this. And we know why they're doing it. Okay? The federal government, this real ID stuff, positioning it over to the state to be in charge of driver's licensing has nothing to do with safety or security as they claim it does. It has nothing to do with verifying identities. It has to do with control. And we know this because literally as we speak, our southern border is wide open and there's literally millions of undocumented immigrants here in the United States, thousands of them in Kentucky, literally thousands of them in Kentucky. There's a hearing where they went over trying to understand how many illegal immigrants do we have in Kentucky? How do we track that? I'll be going over that hearing and exactly what happened in it probably tomorrow. But my point is that if it was about safety and security and they want to know where people are, because in order to get a real ID, you have to present them the same documents that you have to present when you're getting your passport. And so the real ID was going to be, or supposed to be someday, required in order to fly on a plane, or you can show your passport. Basically, they want to make sure they know who's on planes, which once again, that is some rich excuses coming from a government that's literally flying illegal immigrants all over the country who they have no idea who they are. They haven't seen a birth certificate. They haven't seen a picture ID. They haven't verified who these people are. They're just flying them all around, dropping them off in your communities. So it's got nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with control. So make no mistake, I'm not in favor of doing this. I'm not saying it needed to happen. But if the state for some reason felt as if it really just needed to take over the real ID process, there was a much better way to do this. But Kentucky has a problem in that we put so many things as time has gone on historically. We put more and more things under the umbrella of the governor. And when we want a government that's actually responsive to ideas of customer service, well, we need to have elected people who's held accountable for almost specifically just those things or just maybe a few things. But the person who's in charge of making sure you don't have to wait months and months and months or drive hours and hours and hours in order to get a driver's license or a permit, well, that's the governor. And the governor has a million other things that people can be upset at him about, a million other things they're worried about holding him accountable for. And unless you're somebody who just had to deal with this horrible, awful driver's licensing and permitting system, well, you wouldn't really be fresh on your mind. And so for that reason, this obviously shouldn't be under the governor's control. We need somebody who can be responsive and more concerned about it. And we should be moving these things into other departments. Another place where we have a department that has absolutely awful customer service. They drop your calls. They send you on wait forever. You can't handle anything is our Department of Revenue. You have taxes. You want to file taxes. You need help with something. They're not there to help you. They hate you. Clearly, they hate you. Like, where else are you going to go? Give me your money. Give me it. I'll take it from you if you don't. That's their opinion. They're not there to serve you. They're there to make sure the government coffers is full. And so moving those things, dispersing out so somebody can be held accountable. For example, Department of Revenue. Why isn't that under the state treasurer's office? I mean, right now, the layman watching this, what does the state treasurer even do? Do you know what they do? I know what they do. Obviously, I ran for office for it. But do you know what they do? Do you know what makes a good state treasurer or a bad state treasurer? I mean, our current state treasurer, his ads that he ran were all about Joe Biden and energy independence. And it's not exactly super clear on how that really falls into the wheelhouse of the state treasurer's office outside of obviously regulating banking to a degree around those types of policies. But that's about it. So if instead we move something like the Department of Revenue underneath the treasurer's office, well, now it's a very public thing that people deal with them on. And if people are having bad experience with the revenue's office, well, you hold the treasurer accountable for that. And so what might have made a lot of sense when we decided we wanted to go ahead and move over driver's licensing to the state would have been to go ahead and put that with the Secretary of State's office. Why? Well, because who was handling driver's license before? Well, the county clerk's offices were, who also handle elections. And the Secretary of State handles elections. In fact, right now, what does the Secretary of State do other than handle elections? Does those of you listening really know what they do outside of handles elections? Come election time, They will run on talking about how secure their elections are going to be. They'll run on cleaning up the voting rolls. They'll run on voter access. They'll run on everything to do with voting. But they don't really run on anything else because outside of dealing with business licensing, as far as just filing your entity with them and keeping up to date with who actually owns a business, they don't do much else. And so putting driver's licensing with them would now add one thing to their docket of things where it's a very public facing thing. And if a Secretary of State as a state isn't running driver's licensing very well, you would go ahead and vote them out. But also they were already working with the county clerk's office. They already have relationships with them. They have to in order to help run elections in the state. So what obviously would have made the most sense would be just take all the people in the county clerk's office who's currently employed by the county clerk to do driver's licensing, and just go ahead and rehire them to work for the Secretary of State's office doing driver's licensing in each county, and just lease that office space from the local county or whatever else you need to do. And then meanwhile, work out as far as funding goes. But instead what they decided to do was go ahead and give it to the Kentucky Department of Transportation because they do such a good job keeping those potholes filled that let's give them something else to do. And let's give another litany of things that the governor does that nobody will hold him accountable for. And while we're at it, why don't we add on a bunch more buildings and a bunch new employees and make it even more expensive than it would have been before. But of course, that's what our government does. That's why I'm a believer in getting government as much out of our life as possible and to get them to stop doing as many things as we can. Because even when it comes to something as awful as dealing with the DMV, somehow the government can find a way to make it even worse. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I thank y'all so much for joining me. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Hope you have a great rest of your day.